The Bandit of Ashley Downs by Dave and Netta Jackson. Chapter 10. Will the Boiler Blow? The breakfast from heaven, as George Mueller called it, impressed Curly. Mr. Mueller had often told stories after the meals about how God was caring for the children of Ashley Downs. But for the first time, Curly really paid attention. It was George Mueller's practice to report to the children and to other people how God had provided for their needs after God had done so. In fact, Mr. Mueller wrote reports and even traveled around the country speaking to churches and other groups of Christians about how much money came in at the right moment. How else will people know the experiment is working? He would say. I must show them how faithful God is. But I don't go out begging for money. I tell God our needs. I tell people how God provides. Then, one Friday afternoon in November, Mr. Mueller did report a need before God answered. This is an emergency that no human can fill, he announced at lunch, so I can tell you about it before God answers. I am asking all you children to pray. It seems the boiler of the furnace in house number 1 has suddenly started to leak. It is a very bad leak, and winter is coming soon. If we don't repair it, the heat will fail, and the little children will get cold. What's worse, if the boiler should go dry, it could blow up. I know our loving Heavenly Father would not want his little children to suffer, so we must pray that he will help us make the repair. He then went on to explain that a brick wall surrounded the furnace, making it impossible to replace or repair the boiler without tearing down the wall. Such a big project would take several days to complete, and if the weather were cold, the small children living in that house could not keep warm. We have scheduled the repairs for next Wednesday, he explained, but as you can see, and he pointed out the window, a storm is coming. This north wind has picked up a bitter bite. It feels like the beginning of winter is already upon us. So I ask you to pray with me for 2 things. That God would change this north wind into a warm south wind, and that he would give the workmen a mind to work so that the job can be completed quickly. That was Friday. Saturday and Sunday, the cold wind blew harder. Curly felt as if he were at a soccer game, wishing his team could win, but fearing, after seeing the size and skill of the other team, there was no chance. Monday and Tuesday were no better. In fact, by Tuesday night, the night before the work was scheduled to begin, the sky looked heavy with snow about to fall. After supper that evening, Curly's schoolmaster encouraged the boys to gather around and pray. Several did, but Curly didn't say a word. How could God be a loving father, he thought. Maybe he's no different than my old man, doing what he wants, when he wants, no matter who it helps or hurts. That night, as the wind howled outside the windows of his dormitory, Curly's dreams were troubled by visions of his father. In his dream, it was Christmas Eve, and even though his father had come home drunk, he had a bag of peppermint sticks and passed one out to each of the children. But as he staggered round the kitchen, he tripped over the broom that his little sister had left out. His father roared with anger and grabbed the peppermints back from each of the children and threw them in the stove. Curly awoke just enough to realize that it had only been a dream. Or was it a dream? He knew that he wasn't back home, but the dream made him feel just like he had felt many times when he was little and his father had come home drunk. Finally, he went back to sleep, uncertain whether the dream was a memory of something that had actually happened, or just something his mind had made up while he slept. In the morning, Curly was awakened by shouts. Boys were hopping up and down by the windows and pointing outside. Forgetting the dream, he scurried over to where the boys were throwing open the windows. The sun was shining, and the wind had shifted, coming now from the south. It was blowing so warmly and softly that it felt like spring instead of the beginning of winter. The whole orphanage was abuzz with excitement as the workmen arrived with a wagon of tools and supplies. At breakfast, George Mueller thanked the Lord for the weather as well as for the food. He is a faithful father, he reminded the children, especially for those who have no father. But for some reason, Mueller's words today made Curly feel resentful. Somehow, the more of God's goodness he saw at Ashley Downs, the more angry he became about his own life. An orphan at only 6 years old, the son of a mean father who had beat him and the rest of the family and then killed himself with drink. Unpleasant memories of his father that he had forgotten for years were coming back to him more and more frequently, as if they had all happened yesterday. One was particularly vivid. His mother had been so sick that she couldn't get out of bed. She had asked Curly to keep the fire going, but Curly had forgotten. When his father came home late and drunk, he hit his mother while she was in bed for letting the house get cold. Curly tried to forget these memories on that bright November day. He was assigned to make sure that the younger children who lived at house number 1 didn't go near the dangerous construction area or get in the way of the workmen going back and forth to their wagon for tools and supplies. The work began quickly as the men broke open the brick wall with their sledgehammers and pry bars, but on several occasions Curly was startled by one or another of the girls who ran past. If a girl had blonde hair and was about the right age, the same thought kept flashing through his mind. Maybe that's my sister. Of course, when he looked more closely, the girl never was, but it got him to thinking, if I ever find her just living on the street or with some family who ain't good to her, I'm gonna bring her here. By noon, the workmen had found the part of the boiler that was leaking. I think we can rivet a new plate on here and have it ready to fire up in no time, said the foreman to George Mueller when he came by to see how the work was going, but it'll take another day to rebuild that wall. That afternoon, the owner of the repair company came by and asked the workmen if they could work late and come early the next morning to finish the work before the cold weather returned. We've been talking, said the lead repairman. We'd rather work all night. The other repairmen nodded. These children need the heat, so we might as well keep going. Curly couldn't believe his ears. In his excitement, he ran to find Mr. Mueller. Guess what, Mr. Mueller? He said when he found the old man. God answered the other part of your prayer. Those repairmen have a mind to work. Well, you may be right, Curly. It seems to me that they've been doing a very good job, and the work is coming along quite nicely. No, it's more than that. They just volunteered to work all night so they can finish the job before the cold returns. That night in bed, Curly wrestled with conflicting thoughts and feelings. Maybe God was a loving father, as George Mueller said. He had to admit that God certainly seemed to answer Mr. Mueller's prayers. But he's not my father, thought Curly. God might help Mr. Mueller, but he's never helped me. I better play it safe and go back to London and get that money. Then I can take care of myself.